Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Blaze Bell Show. Today I have a guest who has inspired me so much with her work in my community and the entire state of Alaska. Representative Geran Tarr has been a member of the Alaska House of Representatives since 2013. In that time, she has put forth nearly 100 bills. Most recently, she worked tirelessly to pass a new, much-needed law on the definition of consent. Geran Tarr has been working behind the scenes with so much tenacity and passion for making our community a safer place, and the changes that she has made over the years are positively affecting us all. Let's give it up for Representative Geran Tarr. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm so excited. Today, I'm talking with Representative Geran Tarr. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. This is awesome.
Thank you. I'm really excited to join you.
Yeah, so I've been working with quite a few nonprofits over the years, and I think I was just introduced to you along the way, showing up at these different really important events. I think mostly with Victims for Justice, some with STAR. Those are the two groups I work with the most. And you were always present, and even at some press conferences more recently. And so I just started getting to know you a little bit and hearing more and more about the bills that you've put forward and the work that you've been doing as a representative. And a lot of what you're doing really pulls on my heartstrings and are the things that are really important to me. And so I just want everyone in Alaska and the world to know the hard work that you've put in to help make some extremely positive changes for Alaska. And we are Alaska's #1 for sexual assault, domestic violence. We have high rates of child abuse. And I know that those things in particular are really important to you too, along with a lot of, I just read a list. Okay, I didn't finish the list. I looked at a list of bills that you've put forth in your career. And I want to say there's nearly 80. After 30, I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. So you are doing work all over the board, but selfishly, I'd love to focus on the rape reform kits that you've been putting through, Aaron's Law. So anyway, and with MMIP, all these things that are just so deeply important to Alaskans. So can you start by just talking a little bit about those bills, about the rape kit reform bill? What does that mean? What does it look like through your career, pushing that forward? And also with Aaron's Law, and I'm not clear if you created Aaron's Law or you've just been helping with that, but I would really love to hear a little bit about both of those.
Sure. Thank you. Well, we'll just go chronologically. And I just want you to know your words mean so much to me because the fun thing about this job is that every day you have the opportunity to make a positive difference for Alaskans. And I wake up thinking about that. I try to use that to ground me and really focus on important work and not missing the opportunities we have in this position. And so I try to work really hard and try to get important things done. So those words that you shared really, really mean a lot to me. And so when we think about my career, I talk about coming to the legislature as a human rights activist. I have a women's studies background and had previously in college been involved in a lot of efforts around preventing domestic violence and sexual assault and child abuse. I personally grew up in an abusive home and so had that personal experience with child abuse and some of the interaction with the child welfare system and a lot of interaction with the courts through that. So I had some of that personal experience to bring to this work, but also just what we see happening around us. And I always talk about fundamental human rights include the right to feel safe in your home and in your community. And if you don't feel safe, we know that's foundational to being able to be successful in your life in so many other areas. So, for me to prioritize safety makes a lot of sense because I think it's a fundamental human right and that it's often, if not achieved, something that can prevent an individual from really becoming the best person they can be. And given that Alaska has such high rates, and it was something I was working on before the legislature, I worked with an organization that is not around now, but was called Alliance for Reproductive Justice. And we were looking at the whole spectrum of reproductive health care needs and where the law was failing. I'd been a legislative staffer, so I'd had the opportunity to work on some of these issues then, and so had just that personal experience and that a little bit of that background to build upon. And so when I came to the legislature, I said, one of the things I want to focus on is reducing interpersonal violence in Alaska. I say I want to wake up a day where we're not the top of the list for domestic violence, sexual assault, child sexual abuse. It's just difficult to know that's the place you live in. And I want to change that. So in my first year in office, we learned about Erin's Law, and it's named after a woman named Erin Marin. She's from Illinois, and she herself is a child sexual abuse survivor. And she is using her personal experience to try and pass Erin's Law in all 50 states. And she's getting there. It's a truly amazing story. She's been a Time, I think, Woman of the Year. She's met Oprah. She's had a lot of has built a profile around this effort, from traveling to state and making this her personal mission. And really, Erin's Law is about teaching personal body safety. And there are age appropriate and culturally informed ways that you can have those conversations. And so when I first learned about Erin's Law, actually from a neighbor of mine who read about it online, and they said, "Have you considered this for Alaska?" So I first interviewed some teachers and said, "Hey, are you already doing this kind of prevention education with your students? Are we doing the right thing in Alaska?" And I was consistently told, "We're doing some, but we know it's not enough and we need it to happen everywhere." And that's the kind of answer that prompts you to think we need a statewide policy. And so then we introduced Erin's Law. That's the child sexual abuse prevention piece. That's really focused on the K through 8th grade. And then as we were working on it, the sad story of Bree Moore came into the conversation, and her parents got really involved in wanting something around teen dating violence prevention. So then the Bree's Law component got added, and it took a couple of years through a few different legislatures and a supportive governor and a special session, and we were able to get that bill passed. And what it requires is all students in public schools in Alaska are taught the personal body safety for the younger kids, and then the teen dating violence for the older students. And the feedback has been very positive since we've implemented it. Since there are always a couple of hiccups as you do something new, but so far very positive. And we hear even from the high school students, because the younger kids don't come to visit us so much in Juneau, but the high school students do, and they tell us how positive it is that they're getting this education. One place where I think we could all say it made a huge difference is on the Kenai Peninsula this fall. There was a trooper who was arrested for sexually abusing minors.
Oh my God.
And the young person who spoke up and told someone about it said they'd learned about it at school, that they'd
Mm.
learned that that was wrong. And so it encouraged them to speak up. That's what we know happens with Erin's Law across the country, and why we thought it was so important to pass here. And what you're hoping with those kind of laws, it's the primary prevention. We want to make generational changes. And so that's why you start working, as early as possible with the young people in a way that's appropriate, and get that personal body safety. And I think, these things, we just have a few years under our belt right now because of when it passed, but we'll continue to see the positive impact from that. As I was working on that, I received a piece of mail one day. This was in the fall of 2014, about from a group that said, "End the backlog." Well, what's this all about? And so, started looking into that, and this issue of the untested rape kits. At that time, the federal government had really initiated the effort around this. And the very first thing that a state needed to do was have an audit of your untested rape kits. So the very first piece of legislation we passed was the one to complete the statewide audit. That's how we learned there were more than 3,400 untested rape kits across the state of Alaska, right? 3,400. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of pain. That's
Whoa.
a lot of impact to families. And so we got the audit done. That was step number one. And then we were able to access some federal funds. And that put together what was called the SAKI, the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative. So simultaneous to our legislative effort, there was the community-based effort happening through the SAKI, and we were learning from them and they were learning from us. And what is so exciting is through both of those efforts, so many important changes have taken place. On the legislative side of things, the second piece of legislation we passed put in what's considered the gold standard for rape kit processing and a victim centered approach that was recommended by the federal government. So we have two different kinds of reports. One's called the law enforcement report. And that's so at the time of collecting that evidence, if the individual says at that time, I'm ready to engage in law with law enforcement, that process can start right then. Tragically, and what's so difficult about a sexual assault is that it's such a traumatic experience, and this evidence unfortunately has to be collected before an individual can shower, before they can change clothes, right? It needs to be within the first 72 hours, and as quickly as possible gets you the best collection of evidence and the least likely to be degraded or impacted. And so that's a difficult time to put a lot of pressure on someone to say, are you ready to go forward with pressing charges? Especially depending on the circumstances of who it was and whether they knew them or didn't know them. Very difficult. So the second component is called an anonymous report. And in an anonymous report, what happens is that the evidence is collected, and then the individual at a future time can decide whether they want to move forward through the criminal justice process and how they want to pursue that. But in the meantime, because it's time sensitive, we've collected that important evidence. I was so proud of that provision because it's considered the gold standard and because we were among the first states to adopt that following the white paper that came from the US Department of Justice. You know, we're often the bottom of the list or the top of the list for the bad indicators and the bottom for making the changes.
Mm.
So it was this one time in this area, at least in my professional work, where we were actually kind of ahead of what most states were doing. And that felt really good. That legislation also required training for our law enforcement professionals in sexual assault response. Previously, they had training for domestic violence response that was required. And as I'm told, the classes often included discussion on sexual assault, but more in the context of domestic violence. And what we know about sexual assault now, it was made clear to us that we want to make sure those are separate topics so that law enforcement professionals are taught to recognize sexual assault outside of an existing relationship or domestic partnership, or what might look different if it's a situation that's not also domestic
Right.
violence.
Right.
So that was really important. And then the third piece of that was to require an ongoing audit so that we would annually get a report of the progress of the testing of those rape kits. While we were working on that, what was also happening at the crime lab through the work of this Saki was some, figuring out some things like we did not have a tracking system for these rape kits. That
Okay.
blows my mind. Right, we're working on this in the last few years. You can order a package from halfway across the world. I can get online and I can follow its movements, know what airport it was at, know everything until it is received by me. Here, this really important evidence collection piece, what was happening is the kit, as it's called, is prepared at the crime lab in Anchorage. It's a box that includes gloves and swabs and things that you need for collecting biological evidence, and then secure containers for that biological evidence. And so they're prepared and they're sent out to law enforcement agencies across the state. But with no tracking, we had no way of knowing whether a kit has been used or unused, or maybe there's missing evidence. It's
Wow.
just was pretty astounding that we didn't do that. And so now we have a tracking system. We also got funding for testing the backlog. So that was really important. And in December, we hit the important milestone of achieving all the backlog being tested.
Okay,
We
good.
also, yes, created a policy where all the kits will be stored at the crime lab. And so, again, in this anonymous report situation, we don't run the risk of it being stored improperly at the wrong temperature. All those things will degrade the evidence. And so, it was really important that that be put in place. So then, through that, the last piece of work that we've done so far that's passed was the bill that actually put important timelines in place. When we started working on this, it was taking on average more than 2 years for a rape kit to be tested. We know that's far too long. And particularly for the survivor, to be waiting and waiting and waiting and not know what's going on, particularly if it's an unknown individual or unknown suspect,
Yeah.
then, that person's wondering, any of the people in their social circle, right? Maybe it happened at a party. Anyone who who might have been at that party, could it have been them? Very difficult.
Mm.
So we got that changed to be 1 year. And that required some additional staffing and training. And so we're very pleased that they've come to the place where they can achieve that. And let me back up. It required that once a rape kit's collected, within 30 days, it's sent to the crime lab, that it's tested within 1 year, and then within 2 weeks of receiving the test results, the survivor is contacted and let them know what the results are. That way, with the certainty to that process, then you know where you're at in that process and when you might expect to hear someone. Maybe you can prepare yourself. Maybe there's, even a counseling appointment you want to set up following receiving this information, because it's going to be big in your life. And so giving some certainty to that process can make that work that much smoother. We also made some modifications to the audit language to get more detail about why a kit wasn't being tested, or whether the individual declined, for example, or whether the evidence had been degraded, to get more clarity on what was happening. And then where we are today, the last piece of the rape kit reform is to put in statute the requirement that the rape kits be tested within 6 months. And that way, we're getting to that point where we're really reducing the timeline as much as possible and practicable, and being as victim centered in our approach as we can.
Wow. Wow. That was a lot. That's that's really incredible. And I'm very grateful that there's someone out there like championing things for victims. And you know, that's part of my story is trying to get through the criminal justice system as a victim. It's been so difficult to find someone who even knows what the victim's rights are, let alone putting them into motion. And I've had to fight way harder than I think anyone should in order to just get the bare minimum of my rights. And I've always felt like the system seemed to be set up for the perpetrator, not for the victims. And that's really frustrating. And I can also see why so many people give up or don't even bother in the first place to fight for themselves if you're already in crisis and already feeling low, and so I'm just glad that there are other people that are paying attention to what about the victim. And yeah, I think that's huge. And the anonymous piece of that, that's incredible. I'm so glad that someone thought of that and understood the importance of realizing that sometimes someone's not ready on day one. They might think, yeah, if I can give this sample and maybe save another woman, 100% I would. If I have to stand up and testify against this person tomorrow, maybe not. So having that option, that's
Mhm.
huge. Wow.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah, very thank you. Okay, so going back a little to you, and what a like full circle life to be. You mentioned that you went through some trauma in your childhood, and I think we all are very inspired by stories of people who experienced really hard times and were able to find their way out of that at some point. And now you're like a warrior for little girl like that's amazing. So I mean, do you think about that very often? Was that part of why you're where you are today? Or were you the kid that was like, I'm going to be the first female president? Like, did you know that this path was in front of you, or did you just kind of wind up here?
I more kind of just wound up here. I am lucky that I did have some positive influences, and frankly, I ran away from home when I was 13, and that's what got me out of that situation. And my life would have taken a completely different turn, I'm certain, if I hadn't left that situation when I did, and what happened afterwards in terms of educational opportunities and new experiences in my life, and kind of expanding my horizons. But I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college, so I didn't come from a culture of that kind of career path in that same way. And I more came from that human rights activist, and really always wanting to fight for justice and equity and fairness and opportunity. And that passion led me on this path where I was involved in political kind of action, if you will. And that led me into a path of working on legislation. And then that led me to becoming a staffer, which is something I would have never imagined, really, because I have a science background in women's studies. And so I've kind of always worked in one of those areas with, like I say, the human rights work, and a lot on environmental health issues, particularly that impact women's health and reproductive health. So I'd kind of combined those interests. But then I worked on this legislation, and I saw what it meant to be in a position like this and the kind of change you can make. And I wasn't even thinking of running for office then. It wasn't until my former representative asked if I'd ever considered running for office that I really started thinking, could I be someone who does this? One of the things I like to talk about in this job is that you can be somebody who's not from a well-connected family or doesn't have a lot of money and still try to become an elected representative and then do a really good job from working hard, because I think that's one of the things that didn't make me feel naturally included in this, is that we have a lot of folks, and not as a criticism of them, but just the way politics kind of works, is a lot of people who are the offspring or
Sure.
related to someone who'd previously been elected, and that kind of gets you in the world and gets you connected to the people. And so then when they think, well, who should run next, you're kind of in the queue because they knew your family, and you're kind of in that world. So not having had those connections, I felt like I'm a nobody from nowhere, and how am I going to do this? And I was just really determined, I'm just going to work as hard as I can. That's how I've accomplished everything else I've done in life, is just work hard, work harder, and then work even harder. And I'm proud that worked in this regard. I can't say that would happen everywhere. You have to be a good representative for the people that you're going to represent, and have alignment on the values and issues and things you want to do work wise. But I've been very lucky to have this great area that I get to represent, very engaged neighbors, people who care a lot about really important issues of social, economic, and racial justice and safety. So it's gave me the space to really pursue these things. And then just my own personality, that math and science background, I tend to be kind of the kind of person who's always going to have a list for something.
Hmm.
And so as I've worked on legislation, right, it's kind of like there's the list. What are all the things we want to change? And with this rape kit reform, for example, it's like, okay, we're going to deal with these three things, get those done. We're going to do the next three things, get those done, and try to methodically go through it. And that has proven to be very effective. Sometimes people do a massive bill with 20 changes at once, and sometimes that can take years and years and years and years. But we've done the smaller pieces, and it's been great because each year then we've been able to achieve a few of those pieces, to get us to where we are today, where we're trying to get the last piece, which is the 6-month piece, done. And so, the combination of that personal experience and then the personality of being sort of long-term thinking and oriented that way has probably benefited me, in this position. But I do want people to think that every person could be good in this job. I want them to know every person could be good in that job, that we need the diversity of life experiences to enrich these conversations and bring more of that into our policy development, so that our policies can be more effective for more people and exclude fewer groups of people, which unfortunately, as we know, has not always been the case.
True. Yeah, great point. Wow. Well, and that's so inspiring to hear. And I've actually had a few people recently ask me, have you ever thought about running? Have you ever thought about politics? And my first thought is always like, scandal, smear campaign, and I go to the like dirty world. Maybe I watch too much TV, but I was thinking more and more about it. And I was thinking, like, who do I know on a local level who I've seen who seems to really thrive in that position? And, how much good can you do? And you're the first person I thought of as like someone who I see as like a beacon of representing your community. I'm like getting choked up about it and, making really active change. And I think we get kind of used to seeing politicians as good speakers. They're great at being charming, but where is the action? And like a 5-minute Google search of you is just like, boom, 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 boom. Like I didn't have time to read it all, like, and so it's incredibly inspiring. So thank you. Thank you for making that choice and having the courage, because I think that's something where I feel held back, and I'm a very confident person. I think there's probably a lot of people that are passionate about our community and want to help make those changes, but it's like putting yourself out there like that takes a lot of courage. So you've got that going on. So
Thank
we,
you. I just want to say that like made me tear up too. That's really like special to hear you say that. Thank you.
Yeah, your work is making a huge difference. It really is. How can we as community members do more to support the community? Is there, do you ever think like, oh, I just wish everyone would vote in this way or show up for this or make these calls or write these letters? Like, what can we actively do to help push forward positive change?
Well, first, I want to say I would be happy to support you running for office. So if that ever is something you consider, please consider me as someone who wants to support you in that effort. And I think you would do a great job. And all of the above is really the answer there. I think that people tend to think we're hearing from members of the community more than we are. So if you get 5 or 10 emails on the same subject, that's actually pretty impactful because we don't hear in that way. We really don't. We get some of the emails on big issues when there's kind of a hot situation, the permanent fund dividend, for example. We might get a lot of issues on that. But on some of these other issues, because of the conversations I have, I know there are so many Alaskans who want to see more done, who care more. And I think if we use our voices more, which is not always a comfortable thing, then I think we can be more effective. So I really do recommend. It's not always easy to show up in person to testify. I understand that. It's not even always easy and comfortable to call in and testify. And unfortunately, sometimes among my colleagues, people are not as sort of nice to the callers, I guess is the best way to say it. I mean, I've occasionally heard of experiences that people have found pretty negative and it discouraged them from participation. And I just hope those are few and far between when
Yeah.
they do happen, because we work for the public and it should be a welcoming space for everyone to participate. But okay, then you've got the call in. Maybe those two aren't comfortable. Email, like I say, a handful of emails can make such a difference. For example, on our consent legislation that we're working on, we're up to 66 emails. That's a lot. That's a very impressive number. And when people recognize that many have come in, that's the exact reaction they have, like a wow. Their eyes light up. That's a lot of support, because a lot of bill packets have 3 or 4 or 5 letters of support. We have 66. So that makes a difference in it. And especially for a big thing, trying to push it along, then to help it show it has that much public support from across the state, from a diversity of backgrounds and districts. That's really helpful. Letters to the editor are another really great way, because that becomes part of the community conversation and helps let people know that others care about it. And all of us know in the survivor world, when we talk about things, that experience can be so positive. The recognition and awareness that you're not alone, that someone else has experienced it, they've been through it, they've survived it, they're thriving. That can be very inspirational. So those letters to the editor, to the extent people are comfortable sharing personal stories, can be very powerful in that way and open it up the space. But even if it's more just on the policy, again, you may have another neighbor that didn't know that bill was even out there. And so they see your letter and it's like, oh, hey, I want to weigh in. That's really important. Protests when we're not doing the right thing have been very effective on the budget or other issues, women's issues for sure. So the diversity of ways to be involved, phone calls are good too. Hopefully, this can be fun because we need to have fun even when we're doing serious things. And so I always just try and work with folks to figure out what seems fun to you. In campaigns, I love the door to door part and walking through neighborhoods because I love checking out people's gardens and you're outside. So I'm always the one that says, "Hey, sign me up for the door knocking or the lit dropping because I love to do that." Other people don't want to be outside. They prefer to make phone calls. So hopefully, we have enough options that we can find the one that makes it fun for you to participate. I think of John Lewis, and when he passed, there was an event recognizing him, and I was looking up some of his inspirational quotes. And one of them is the idea that you have to pace yourself because when we're in this for social justice work and this lasting change, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so when we think about our own involvement, I think that's another piece of it. Not only something you like, so that when you have the experience, it feels fun, and hopefully the folks you're volunteering for feel a responsibility to make it fun too. But then also in a way that doesn't burn you out. And I think that self care piece of it is something we're recognizing more. You probably are experience this in some of the work you do, and people are disclosing stories to you. That happens with us, and that's impactful. And so I can think of one of my staff when we were working on Aaron's Law, we had a lot of parents getting in touch, lots of parents, and sharing stories of things that had happened to their kids. And it was just tragic, some of these stories, and hard to read. And, it's hard to sort of turn off your emotional response to that. And so there were times where, the staff person said, I feel like I need to go take a walk. I just need a little bit of a reset here, some fresh air. This had been difficult. So, just applying that and how we do it. If you do the phone calls and then there's the night, where it just doesn't feel like the night you feel like doing it, that's okay too, right? We all want to be supportive of each other and our own wellness and health. So all of the above, but taking care of yourself and making it fun because unfortunately we're in this for the marathon and not the sprint.
Yeah. Thank you. Those are all incredible suggestions. And yeah, that's helpful because I do know a lot of people that like I want to do something, but does anyone hear me? What can I do? And I'm going to go with the email, hearing that it makes an impact when there's 5, 10, 15 emails. That's something we can all do. And
Yes.
and that also explains why I think it was in 2020, there was a huge cut, like from nationwide, but a huge cut to a lot of the nonprofits that I work with, a budget cut. It's been rectified. Everything's okay now. But in that moment, I was livid, and I don't get upset very often like that. And it like felt good almost. I was just like, oh, like you feel the fire inside, and I thought, let me look at my life. What's the best way for me to help? Is it calling and testifying? I could do that, but I'm going to get on social media because that's a thing I already do. And instead of even a post, like I made a video, and I'm like, they're going to look at my face and they're going to see that this is not okay. And, when I did this like 2-minute thing about what was going on, and you found out who to email, and um, um, next thing I know, someone from the governor's office is calling me saying, I saw your video and it's gotten a lot of attention. And there, I don't know how many people sent messages, but a lot of just kind of random acquaintances that got fired up with me. And they even said, like, can you give me a template? I'm not sure what to say, but I want to support you because this sounds important, And I said, sure, check this out, put it in your words if you want, put your name on there. And so, yeah, that's impactful. And that's something we can all do.
Yeah. Well, congratulations for making such an impact. That's awesome. And I hope for listeners that will be inspiring to think of just other ways that simple action that you needed to take for yourself, right? Because
Mhm.
you were feeling that fire, but that then had that really big impact because um we're all busy. And so I'm sure what that proved, pardon me, is that other people really cared about that too. And so it was just a matter of kind of getting the information to them. And I'm glad you said that, because I would say kind of a last point on that is just remembering people are really busy, and they're doing a lot with the time they have and the responsibilities they have to themselves, to their jobs, to their families. And so just appreciating when people do take that action is, I think, a really important part of this, because every bit makes a difference. Every little bit makes a difference, from the email to the video. And so thank you for doing that. And thank you for inspiring others to do that. That's such a great story.
Thank you. Well, thanks again, Representative Tarr, for talking with us today and just sharing. You're very passionate, and it's so good and inspiring to see that you're in our community. I feel like lucky that you're here with us, because we really need the work that you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I loved being here today, and keep up all the awesome work you're doing. And I look forward to seeing you in Anchorage sometime soon.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, drop a comment, leave a review, or DM me so we can keep this conversation going. You can find me on social media at BlazeBellBliss, and check out blazebell.com for tons of healing inspo, courses, and resources. Thanks for listening, friends. See you next time.